The Unbroken Place podcast with Eddy Paul Thomas is a production of Say Something Studios. Welcome to season 2 of the Unbroken Place podcast, where it begins and ends with empathy. I'm your host, Eddy Paul Thomas, and we begin this season 2 with a powerful conversation. Educator, author, and nationally recognized TEDx speaker Erin Jones joins us to talk about equity, education, and what it means to lead with empathy in a really divided world. From her groundbreaking work in classrooms to her really candid reflections on race, leadership, and healing, Erin's story is one of resilience, purpose, and bold vision. This episode really sets the tone for season 2. It's rooted in empathy, connection, and really a theme that you'll see throughout this season: courageous truth-telling. So let's go. Erin Jones, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the Unbroken Place. I know I've spoken to a lot of the people who listen to this podcast, and there are a lot of questions about an area that you happen to be an expert in. And so I really want to thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I watch your clips on TikTok, and I'm really excited about the work you're doing. So I'm happy to be part of this work.
Thank you. Well, so let's dive into your perspective and background just a little bit. Just kind of looking at your diverse experience across educational environments, and the different things that you've experienced. What do you think, in your opinion, kind of shapes your worldview in terms of federal versus state control in education?
So I really have to go back to the beginning for that. So I was born in the United States, abandoned in a hospital, and adopted by 2 white educators from northern Minnesota, public school teachers from small town Minnesota. They decided when I was 5 to take me out of Minnesota and raise me in the Netherlands. My dad got a teaching job at the American School of The Hague in the Netherlands. It's the school that serves the United Nations. The United Nations World Court was about a mile away from my school growing up. So all the State Department kids went to our school. It was an American school, but in the Netherlands. So we got all the same curriculum that kids would get here in the United States. So that is how I was raised. K-12, I went to the American School of The Hague. So I took AP classes. I played sports like other American kids. I played in the band. I came back to the United States for college as an 18-year-old. I actually got accepted at Princeton, but they didn't give me a big enough scholarship. So I went to the sister college to Princeton right outside of Philadelphia. And that was my first exposure to American schools in the United States. Now, I had this idea of American schools because I had watched Rocky. I had watched Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I had watched, like when I thought about Philadelphia, I had this understanding of Philadelphia that was based on media. I had also read lots of books. My white parents made sure that I read Alice Walker and Zora Neale Hurston and James Baldwin. So I had probably read more Black historical figures than a lot of American kids because my parents went out of their way to make sure they knew as white people that I needed to be really prepared. What I wasn't prepared for, though, was the America of 1989 that I came back to. I thought we were so much more advanced, and I was really shocked by the difference in schools in the U.S. And so, just to explain that, I went to college at Bryn Mawr College, which is one of the best women's colleges in the world. People from all over the world send their girls there. It's a really elite school. It is located right outside of Philadelphia in the 7th wealthiest suburb in the United States. So the public school in Bryn Mawr is completely different from the public school in West Philadelphia, which is just 20 minutes down the road, just completely different. And what I realized right away is, wait, Bryn Mawr schools are 100% white and wealthy. West Philadelphia schools 100% Black and poor. And the education that children were getting in those 2 places were completely different. I remember Bryn Mawr town, Lower Merion High School, had a computer lab in 1990. In my school that I volunteered at in West Philadelphia, there was not one computer in the entire building. The secretary didn't have a computer. The principal didn't have a computer. And that's when I started paying attention to education. And I really had no intention of becoming involved in education. I was going to go back to Europe, work in the United Nations. But it was at the end of my freshman year that I knew I need to stay in America and I want to be the teacher for these kids who look like me that I got to have as a kid. And so I have taught in North Philadelphia. I've taught in South Bend, Indiana. I taught public school and private school in South Bend, Indiana. I actually was Pete Buttigieg's PE teacher when he was in the
Ah,
eighth grade. Yeah, in South Bend. And then I taught ELL in Columbus, Ohio. And then my husband is from Tacoma, Washington, and we moved back to Tacoma once we had our second kid. And I got to work in the public schools in Tacoma. And then on the east side of our state in Spokane, I won the Milken Teacher of the Year award, and that propelled me to work for our state Department of Education. And I
right.
served on cabinet there for 4 years, assistant state superintendent. And that exposed me to, so I had this local experience as a classroom teacher, but then I had this state level experience. And that state level experience helped me to understand even the distinction between state and federal. And then I ran for state superintendent in 2016. I'm actually the first Black woman and the only Black woman to ever run for a statewide office in the state of Washington. I lost that race by 1 point. But what that race taught me is how money works and how systems are impacted financially. I think a lot of Americans don't realize that when Donald Trump talks about ending the federal Department of Education, the feds don't control our curriculum and they don't control our instructional practices. But I think a lot of Americans think, this woke curriculum is coming from somebody in Washington, D.C. But the reality of this country is that all of our curriculum decisions are made at the local level, not even the state level. They are made by school boards in your local community. They are the ones deciding what books your students are looking at, what curriculum teachers are allowed to teach. The money comes from the federal government down through your state government to your local government. And that's kind of the process. That 35-year trajectory that I've had is kind of how I came to understand those things.
Yeah. See, I'm glad you touched on that from the very beginning, because it was literally the very next question that I was going to dive into. And just how people who don't know a lot about it, but I mean, if you rely on media to give you the information, you're going to be either very excited that the Department of Education is being dismantled, or you're going to be scared to death.
Yeah.
And so I guess if you could just kind of talk about what are some potential positives of dismantlement and some of the negatives that people really need to kind of pay attention to, that I think that would help. I don't know if it would necessarily ease any tensions, but it would certainly help people walk around with a little more information.
But I think the challenge to saying I'm just going to end the Department of Education also flies in the face of law that created the Department of Education. So I'll provide a little bit of perspective there that I'm hearing on social media. There was a woman who posted a video about the department going away and said, since 1979, when it was created, we've gone down in our ratings as a country. So the Department of Education hasn't done any good at increasing our value worldwide. And here's my argument against that perspective. First of all, when we measure worldwide, we are measuring a random sampling of children across this country. Education from state to state is not equal. So what is happening in Mississippi is not the same as what's happening in California. What's happening in California is not the same as what's happening in Idaho or Montana. And so we are also one of the largest countries in the world with the most geographical difference and socioeconomic difference. We also have an obligation by law to serve all children, which is not the same for other countries. So some other countries don't serve all children. They don't serve special needs children. They don't serve immigrant children in the same way. They don't serve, there's a variety of different people they don't serve. We in this country, because of law, IDEA is one of the laws around special education, have an obligation to serve every child. And so it's kind of apples to oranges. So I tell people, stop comparing us to Finland, because Finland, I had the opportunity when I was the assistant state superintendent to meet with the Secretary of Education for Finland right at the beginning when Finland was at the very top. I somehow got invited to a dinner in Seattle and got to spend 24 hours with the Secretary of Education right as they were hitting the top. And here's what he said. And it was really profound and not surprising since I lived in Europe. Finland is a pretty homogeneous country. It
Yes.
is culturally homogeneous, socioeconomically, the way that they support people. They don't have the poverty that we have here. So everyone kind of lives at a similar level. Everyone has access to early childcare, preschool. Everyone has access to quality education and kind of the same education. So their education is standardized across the system from preschool all the way through. They have the same standards for everyone. We don't have that here in the United States. And that is both a beautiful thing and a difficult thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the beauties about the United States is we can decide based on region what we want our children to be exposed to. And I see advantages to that. There are also disadvantages, though, because if I live in Mississippi, I can tell you my kid who has ADHD or who is on the autism spectrum, who's Black, is not going to get the same quality of education as that same child in Washington State because we have different standards and expectations. But Finland has the same for everybody. So you could go to one school here and they're going to be teaching the same thing as they teach in another school in another town in Finland. But it's a small country, so they can manage that. And they have resourced it because it's a small country. They're able to resource and think about things in a standardized way. We don't have that capacity because we're serving so many children across such a vast country with so many different needs. So what he said is, you know what, you shouldn't be measuring us against you because it's apples and oranges. So that's number one. I think when people critique the Department of Education against other countries, that it's just not a fair comparison. So what does the Department of Education do at the federal level? They provide resources for our special needs students, for our Title I schools, which is our highest poverty schools. And by the way, we have more students who live in poverty than any other industrialized nation in the world.
Yeah.
We have more children living in poverty in this country. We are also the wealthiest country in the world, but we have more children living in poverty. And Title I funds come from the federal government and provide support to those children who are living beneath the poverty line. It also provides supports to our migrant students and our English language learners. Now, not curricular supports, but resources. So the federal government really drives not curriculum, not textbooks, not materials, not instructional requirements, but they provide the dollars. So from the feds, those dollars get resourced out to states, and those states then distribute those funds to those people. I am very concerned about those things not being available, and just the way that I'm hearing word about how they are going to allocate those resources, it will be equal but not equitable. So $3,000 in one state per student is not the same as $3,000 to another state because the economies are different. And that's what I'm hearing conversation about, is they want to do block grants, like a certain dollar amount per student, which is just not equitable, and it's not a fair way to resource students. Now, the other thing that the Department of Education does at the federal level is they hold all of our civil rights accountability measures. So Title IX, which is making sure that that students have access across gender, students are not discriminated against based on all of their identities. So gender, race, language, special need. If that were to go away, here's what I know. Students in Mississippi, students in Arkansas are not going to experience the same quality of education as students in Washington State or Oregon or California. And so what I worry about, I don't worry about my state. The state of Washington, I think we'll figure out a way because our governor and just the people of Washington State are really committed to equity. They're really committed to making sure that we resource people. I really worry about the smaller, really red states who already are struggling, who already don't have enough resources. I think another thing people don't realize is because we fund schools based on property tax, most blue states are actually funding the education of red states.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks don't realize that. So they think, us blue states are pushing woke curriculum on you. No, actually, we're funding your school is what we're doing. We are funding your social program. And I think a lot of folks are not aware of that in red states where they are voting against healthcare and voting against education reform. They don't realize that a lot of their schools are open because we, in places like Washington State and California and Oregon, are funding so much of what happens. So that pool of resources goes to the federal government and gets dispersed then according to certain metrics across the nation. But to lose the Department of Education, what I'm hearing said is that, this department will go to health, like special needs will go to the Department of Health Services. But here's my concern around that. I have worked at the state education department, so our state Department of Education, and to ask now states to take on the responsibilities that have been at the federal level with thousands of people have been doing that work, to now ask 50 states to take on new work and to learn new work and to learn to navigate laws that have been at the federal level but not at the state level. I think that's going to blow up. And again, in states that are already well resourced, I think we will make it work. We'll figure it out. I
Yeah.
worry about the states that are already struggling now to make things
Yeah.
work, that the burden of that is overwhelming. And I think people have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you bring up a very interesting point, because many, many, many years ago, I started off student teaching before I figured out that education in high school and middle school was not really for me. I used to have hair, believe it or not. But I learned a number of things, just how things were funded, how things curriculum wise were developed. And even when I later I was a professor of cross-cultural communications, just looking at the way that things were structured, it seemed very clear that depending on the state and their priorities, there were always going to be leave behinds, not just for one specific way or another, but one thing that I saw overwhelmingly was that they were punitive in the way they judged a school on their performance. So instead of, hey, this school is really falling behind, we need to put more resources, we need to hire more teachers, we need to do more for kids with IEPs, it was, well, we're going to take away
Yep.
from you. And I've never seen that. And you can name the industry. Could you imagine a hospital saying, oh, this person's not performing on this medication the way they should, we're going to take away more medications from that? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. And I don't know if you've had that experience where you could kind of unpack maybe
Yeah.
a experience of how that's happened and what that looks like in real time.
So I think I talk about this a ton. I think the United States has a scarcity mentality. So
Yes.
there's this notion that there's only so much. There's a pot that is finite. So we only have these many resources. And if I give it to this person, then I've got less for me. So I think
Mm-hmm.
we operate out of this scarcity mentality. What does
Yeah.
that mean then? What I have seen as somebody who has now lived in the US for 35 years, I came here at 18. I'm 53 now. I've lived in from the East Coast to the West Coast. The only place I have not lived is the South, and I lived in Indiana, which I call the Mid-South. So I feel like I've lived in every kind of environment in the US. What I have noticed for the course of my 35 years is in the US, in order to get help, you have to prove that you are failing enough.
Right.
Instead of resourcing people based on what we know they are going to need. So in Europe, I'll just give an example from the Netherlands where I grew up. The Netherlands knows that in order to develop quality students, you need to invest in their early childhood. So they invest in early childhood education. Everyone has access to free preschool. Food is available at school. Finland and the Netherlands, most countries in Western Europe have free food at school for
Mm-hmm.
everyone. You don't have to prove that you're failing enough to get food. They just provide food because they know when children eat, they are able to learn more effectively. So I
Mm-hmm.
watched that as a child. Just the resources were given. Healthcare was given. As part of your taxes, everyone has access to healthcare because they know when people are healthy, when they have dental care, they are able to function at optimal levels. In the United States, however, it's almost like you have to prove you're worthy enough to have access to
Yeah.
those things, right?
Yeah.
And and I think it's because of that scarcity mentality. And I have this mentality just because I grew up in a different environment and I've only worked in poor schools. So with the exception of the 2 years that I taught at Pete Buttigieg's school, my entire experience is in the highest poverty schools wherever I lived.
Mm-hmm.
So what I knew for those kids when I walked into that building is if they eat, they're going to do well. So I brought snacks to school. I always had a drawer filled with snacks and fruit, and I knew my students are going to learn better if they, oh, I also knew, we need to get a dentist in here because I've got a couple of kids with teeth that are rotting out of their mouths and they can't learn. So we would figure out how to get hairdressers in to take care of kids' hair, how to get them clothes. I developed a clothing closet, all those things that I knew kids needed. And guess what?
Mm-hmm.
They learned better. Guess what? My kids performed better on state tests, not because I'm a better teacher, but because I knew from my experience growing up somewhere else that if we just give people what they need, they will show up.
Well, yeah.
But I think what we've done in this country is we have this scarcity mentality. I'm going to hold on tightly to what I have, and the only way I'm going to give you a little bit is if you prove you're really failing enough. And here's what happens in the school space. Every single school that I taught in my whole career was deemed a failing school. That's what it's called in the newspaper, failing school. So here's what that does. It sets up teachers to believe they are failing. But here's what I'll tell you. After all my years of teaching in failing schools, and I did 15 years as a classroom teacher in failing schools and then became an administrator. And I served our school improvement team at the state, which supported all 15 of our most failing schools in the state. So I have lots of experience with failing schools. Mm-hmm. We tell teachers you are failing, even though I can promise you they are working harder than any teacher you've ever met. Because they're showing up early, they're supporting kids during lunch, they're feeding children, they're giving them pens and paper because their families can't provide it, they're clothing children, they are making sure they often show up at games for those children because nobody from their families can show up because mom or dad is working 3 or 4 jobs. All the stuff that teachers in our failing schools are doing that is outside of the clock, that they're not getting paid for, that they're not being reimbursed for, teachers are doing that stuff. And so at the state level, I reframed it as these are not failures. It's opportunity gaps. We need to provide opportunity. We need to provide access, right? We need to reframe how we're even talking about these schools, because here's what state tests do. State tests, the only thing a state test tells you is how wealthy that school is. That's the only thing state test scores tell us, is how wealthy a school is. And so why are we doing that? We already know where the wealth is. So let's invest resources in the schools that are failing. Let's invest resources. And that means food resources. It means after school activities. It means making sure that kids have access to clothing and healthcare and dentistry. This to me is not rocket science. But again, we have this scarcity mentality and we force people to grovel and feel ashamed. And guess what? When you feel ashamed, it's really hard to do your best work. It's really hard to do your best work when you feel ashamed. So we got to stop the shame, blame, guilt thing. And we got to say as a country, let's invest in places that we know don't have what they need.
The Unbroken Place podcast will be back in just a moment. What if the clarity you've been searching for isn't out there, but already within you? I'm Eddy Paul Thomas, life and leadership coach. I work with purpose-driven people who are ready to lead boldly, live intentionally, and grow from the inside out. Whether you're at a crossroads or leveling up, coaching can help you move with confidence, wisdom, and impact. This is your time. Visit eddypaulthomas.com to get started. Imagine a place where the untold stories of Black missionaries are amplified, honored, and celebrated. A place that bridges the legacy of the people of the way with the powerful missions work of today's African diaspora. Welcome to the Black Missions Museum, a digital project dedicated to preserving the voices, culture, and legacy of Black missionaries across the globe. But we need your help to bring this vision to life. Your support makes a difference. Join us in this mission by donating today. Just click the link in the show notes to give and be a part of history. Together, we can inspire future generations and keep the legacy alive. In today's fast-moving world, thriving teams and ethical leadership are essential to business success. So how do entrepreneurs build spaces where people flourish while scaling up? At Elevate One Consulting, Dr. Erica Garcia Thomas and Eddy Paul Thomas are helping organizations grow with purpose, blending evidence-based strategies interactive training, and dynamic speaking, they equip leaders to boost engagement, transform culture, and drive results. From executive advising to brand revitalization, Elevate One delivers solutions that help your business do more than survive. It thrives. Visit elevateoneconsulting.com to get started. Elevate One Consulting. Innovate, grow, elevate. And we're back. Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and I think my only pushback, and I'm hoping that you just destroy and dismantle my statement here.
Yeah.
So please beat it up. The thing that I can relate to you on is in travel and being able to see the world from different perspectives because you've seen different cultures, you've experienced it. It wasn't a vacation. It was, these were mission trips, or these were peacekeeping scenarios that I've been able to travel and meet. And when you're able to look at how our country operates from just speaking on educational purposes, when you get to look at it from an outside perspective, we are missing a lot of community. We think we have community, but we are missing a lot of the communal aspects where we are taking care of each other within that community, as opposed to what you were saying. Everyone's kind of out for themselves, trying to get the things that they want for their children specifically, as opposed to what's best for all. And I look at this as a scenario where the data is very, very clear. It's very clear. And you laid it out very eloquently. When you see how well someone is performing, there's a direct correlation to how much money that family has. And so my question is, with so much data, so much evidence that points people in the way of how we can fix things in education, why aren't we fixing these things in education? What is the purpose behind a workforce that isn't performing well educationally?
So, I have so many thoughts about this. And I happen to be a person of faith. So I am a Christian. I'm a Jesus person. I I'm leery of calling myself a Christian because I think Christianity in America has been usurped by politics. So I call myself a follower of Jesus. But I think, gobsmacked by the white Christian church and its antagonistic attitude towards any kind of support publicly for the poor, for the marginalized, for those in need. I'll just give you a real true story. This happened last year during our legislative session here in Washington State. We are a blue state, but our rural communities are very red. So we're really more a purple state. It just happens to be that where Seattle is blue. And so because Seattle is our highest density populace, we end up becoming blue. We look blue. Who's our governor is always a Democrat. Our executives are almost always Democrats. But our state is really purple in every other place and very red in some places. I got a call last year in the last week of hearings. And I testify often because I worked in state government. I get invited to testify in education bills all the time. And one of my former students was Teacher of the Year 3 years ago for our state. And I'm so proud of her. She is biracial like me. We look really similar. I've known her since she was 12. Like how proud as a teacher to have. I was actually her +1 when she got to go to the White House. She asked me to be her, not her husband. I was her +1. Like there's nothing better than that. But I will do anything for this woman. And she texted me one morning and she said, Erin, are you in Olympia? I happen to live in our state capital. She said, are you here today? I am going to be testifying on a bill on inclusion. I really would love to have you here if you can get here. Well, it turns out I was flying out that day, so I couldn't get to the Capitol. She texted me about half an hour later and said, there's another bill after this one about feeding kids lunches. Every kid would get a free lunch. And she said there are 200 people from the Republican Party here signed up against that bill. She
Ah,
called me in tears. She said, Erin, I don't, 200 people here signed up to speak against a bill to feed children, and they're all Republicans. And she happens to be a Jesus girl, too. I actually met her in church, and we just cried over the phone. I think, back to something you said just a minute ago, I think that America is destroying itself with its rugged individualism, and that rugged individualism has become part of the church. And the church has bought into this idea of rugged individualism, and that is destroying us all. And I saw this. My husband was a pastor, so I have seen from the inside and from the outside. My husband is a Black man who was a pastor in a predominantly white evangelical church, which no longer exists, and that's a story for another day. But I got to see from the inside these messages about take care of your own, hold on to your own, and if you do right, you'll get. So if you don't have what you need, it's because you did something. And there are these messages that have been,
right.
I'm going to say, bastardized. The Bible has been used as a weapon, as a tool against the marginalized, against the widow, against the orphan. And for me, the Bible is very clear that those are the very people we're supposed to support. I share the story of the Good Samaritan all the time as a message. For those who don't know the story of the Good Samaritan, basically Samaritans at the time were the most hated people by the Jews. I mean, they were the people that you were not supposed to associate. Jesus was not supposed to associate with Samaritans. And there's a story of a man on the side of the road who's been beaten up, and the priests two different priests walk by him and do nothing. They walk on the other side of the road, in fact, and just leave him lying there. And this Samaritan, who's not like them at all, he's the bad guy, he's the other guy, he's the foreigner. He doesn't just walk by. He goes over and cleans him off. Imagine cleaning off somebody who's been beaten up, like using your own stuff to clean this guy up,
Yeah.
and then carries him to a hotel. And not only carries him to a hotel, but then pays the hotel owner extra money to take care of this guy. Says, hey, please take care of this guy. I've got to go to work, but I'm going to come back. And if there's any outstanding fees, I will pay those too. That is what I tell people. I was like, that's what the church should be doing right now. And it's not. And so even people who call themselves people of faith have turned their backs on the very people that I believe we are called to serve. And so I am, again, gobsmacked. I am
Yeah.
shocked by the people who are most antagonistic to any kind of support around healthcare, around feeding of children, around education.
Yeah.
And here's just really transparently my thought about education and why some folks are happy to destroy education. Because when people are educated, when people have a critical mind, they are able to think for themselves. They are able to discern between lies and truth. They're able to discern between opinion and fact. And there's a whole group of people that would love for this next generation to not be able to do that, and are absolutely happy if certain groups of people don't get educated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
I
that's a shame. I think it's a shame.
yeah. We could probably spend the next 3 days on the gosh, the multiple ways in which education and faith interact with each other. There's so many intersections that don't make sense. And then you look at, I wrote about this in my book where I was stunned after doing the research that African American women are the most educated people group in the
Yep.
United States, yet they are the least paid for
Yep.
the same job as many others who do the exact same thing. But I digress, because I seriously, I could talk to you for 3 days on this and not lose any steam. Like, we've got Christmas coming up, Eddie. You got stuff to do. People are coming. Yeah, so I think for me, I don't disagree. I don't disagree that um, in terms of some of what you see from the majority culture church, some of the attitudes are like, okay, this is clearly Western. This isn't, you go to the church in many other parts of the world,
No,
and
you
that's
don't see it.
not how they interact. It's much more, and I'll use this word forever now. I think it's one of my themes for 2025: communal,
Yep.
taking care of one another, not
Yep.
because there's a moral imperative, but you also see that, hey, if I don't help you take care of the fire in your apartment down the way here, that fire is going to eventually spread to mine. I need to help you because it's also going to help myself. And so I just don't see enough of that.
Can I
And
share a real story about that?
oh, please do. Please do.
So when we first came to Washington State, I had two little boys at the time. My youngest son was 2 months old. My oldest son was 18 months old.
Mhm.
And I had been teaching in Columbus, Ohio, but I knew when we got here, my husband was hired as a youth pastor. I knew that I was going to end up spending as much on health on childcare as I was going to get paid as a teacher. So we made the decision as a couple. I'm just going to stay home for a couple years. I'm going to stay home. I've got two little black boys. I need to make sure that they can read and write and do math before they start school. I already knew this. I had been in America long enough to know that little black boys need to be ahead of the game before they even start school. And so I decided to stay home with them. The first 2 years, my mother-in-law was running an after-school program, and I would take them almost every day to her program. They got exposure to reading and writing and other kids who were older. We went
Mhm.
to the library almost every day. I mean, it just was really pretty beautiful. We moved to a new neighborhood, and I decided to turn our garage into a little school for my kids.
Hmm.
I was out at doing garage sailing one day, and this Christian school had a sign outside that said, "Come by our school." And I was like, "Buy our school? What?" But I went inside, and I had $200. That's all I had in my pocket. And the lady said, "We are done with this. Would you buy the whole school?" I said, "All I have is $200." And it was desks and chairs, and it was a tiny school, but all the books, all the manipulatives, everything, and all like almost new stuff, really beautiful stuff. She let me buy the whole school for $200, and I turned my finished garage into this beautiful school for my two little boys. Well, when the summer came and school was out for the rest of the neighborhood, I remember one day there's a knock at the door, and it's this little kid from down the street. I'd seen the kid playing outside. "Hey, Miss Lady, can I use your bathroom?" And I said, "Sure, come use my bathroom." And then the next day, this little kid had a friend. "Can we use your bathroom?" "Okay, sure." And then they come out of the bathroom. "Can we have a snack?" I thought,
Oh,
okay, what is going on here?
yeah.
And I gave them a snack, and I said, how do you not give kids a snack? And I
Right.
sent them on their way. And then a couple days later, I had the garage door open because
Hmm.
it was really warm, and we were studying in our little school in our garage, and it was a beautiful, I mean, we had the kid carpets. They even sold me all their kid carpets. So we had these beautiful carpets and chairs, and probably enough to seat about 20 kids. And my kids are in there, and I'm doing a lesson, and these two little kids come by, and then they bring two more of their friends, and there are four little kids, and they come into our garage, and they ask, "Miss Lady, what are you doing?" So I'm teaching my little boys. This is our little school.
Hmm.
Look, can we join your school? And these kids, my boys at the time were 2 and 4. These kids were, I think, 6 and 7, maybe 8 years old. So they're four little kids. I said, sure. Do you know, we ended up teaching 15 kids every day that summer. They would
Stop.
show up at my house at 8:30 every morning. I'd feed them breakfast. Starbucks donated all their day-old pastries to me. Our church invested in lunch food. And then I would give them a snack in the afternoon. And then y'all need to go home at 4 because Miss Erin needs a break. Um, but people asked why I did that. And I said something that you just said. I said, you know what? These are our community students. Now, do you know why these children were coming to my house? Because their parents, even though it looked like a new neighborhood, and it was a new neighborhood, it
Hmm.
looked pretty middle income. It wasn't middle income. It was that right on the edge of working class. And these families had no money to pay for childcare for their children all summer. And so their children were left at home by themselves. Now, some people would ask, well, why didn't you call CPS? First of all, I was not a teacher at the time, so I had no obligation to call CPS. Secondly, I knew enough about CPS that if I called CPS, probably nothing was going to be done, and I was going to be blackballed in my community. So I said, what can I do to
Hmm.
serve these young people? And it's not because I'm just such a good person. It's because I realized, much like you just said, if I serve these children and they all learn how to read and write, and by the way, none of them knew how to read and write. And by the time I had 15 kids, I had a child who was 12 years old who could not read, and I got to teach him how to read that summer. I invested in those young people because I knew If anybody's breaking into a house, it's not going to be mine because they all know me. They all know
Right.
me and I've invested in them. But I also am going to make sure all of these children leave here able to read and write, because if they're able to read and write, the chances of them needing to break into a house are nil. I think we need to have that mentality. And again, that individual mentality, I'm just going to take care of mine. I'm going to close that garage door and just
Right.
take care of mine. I think that is destroying us.
Yeah. Yeah. It certainly erodes trust.
Yes.
It says a lot without even saying a word.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I agree. I agree. It's totally eroding communities in our country. I'm gonna shift gears just a little bit, because you and I have both been in the position of educator. Um, I couldn't imagine being one right now. Not at the
Yeah.
collegiate level. That's a different animal. I'm talking about,
Yeah.
you know, junior high, high school, middle
Yeah.
school. Um, trying to figure out what this transition is going to look like for those educators. What what measures do you think should be put in place to support teachers during the potential transition from federal support to state only support?
So to be honest, I don't think teachers are going to feel it in the ways
Hmm.
that I think administrators at the school district level are going to feel it,
Yeah.
and they're going to be pressured to possibly pull resources out of schools. I think, again, it's really going to depend based on the state that you happen to be in. So I think in Washington state, our government is going to work to resource schools. We have an obligation in our state constitution that schools must be amply funded, and they are the first things that are funded in our state government. So before they fund anything else, our schools have to be amply funded, not just funded for survival, but amply. It means more than enough funded. So I think a place like our state, I don't think people are going to feel it in the same ways that they feel it in other states. But here's what I will
Mhm.
say to any parent watching.
Huh.
Parents, if you care about your children, and not just your children, but children who have learning needs, children who are already on the edges, I need you to show up at your school board meetings. I need you to show up and testify in front of your state legislatures where they are going to be making decisions about how to resource your school. I need people to get involved and to let their voices be heard. And I need you to understand, much like we have already been talking about, that what happens to that child down the street with a learning disability is going to affect your child at some point.
Yeah.
And so if we
Mm.
only care about our child, who is a typically developing child who is doing fine, they're doing fine. They're in all regular classes. Maybe they're even in honors classes or AP. If that's all you care about, your child is going to be impacted by that kid down the street who doesn't have all those access and resources. And so I need us to care about all of our children and to see them
Mhm.
all as having imports and being valuable to the future of this country. And so I need people to speak up. I need people to speak out. It is not too late right now to call your state senator and to say, hey, here's the thing I know too. President Donald Trump cannot just abolish the Department of Education without getting Congress to sign off. So that's another reality. And so it is not too late at this point to call your state representative, to call your congresspeople and to say, hey, please say no to closing the Department of Education. Please say no. So I would invite anyone who's watching this. I know that my state representative, they already know me. I have already talked to them. But make sure you, as an independent citizen, have a voice. You didn't just elect these people. They need to be listening to you. They need to be hearing from you. If you're not sure what to say, have somebody help you craft an email and send an email. But I think we all need to be communicating, hey, we need the Department of Education to stay open. That being said, I am also critical of just how things work. And I am not one to say that public education is lovely and we shouldn't look at the Department of Education and figure out where is there waste. I'm sure there's waste at the Department of Education. I'm sure there is, because I
Mhm.
worked for our state Department of Education. There are people existing there who probably shouldn't be there. So I'm not saying we shouldn't be critical. I'm not saying that there are not opportunities to pare back certain things, but I am saying we shouldn't just demolish a thing without actually understanding what it does. And I think
Right.
that is our biggest problem right now, is that I think there are too many people in decision-making positions who don't actually know what the Department of Education does. And we need to make sure that we are speaking out to them. Here's another thing I'll say, and I have done a video about this on my TikTok. I've done several videos about this. I think if we could take out one thing that would save this country more money than anything else, there's one thing that we could do that would help our teachers, to your question, and would help our administrators, would help our states, is to end state testing. State tests are one of the most expensive things that
Yes.
we do. They are not helpful. They are not supporting educators to help your students become better students.
No. No.
They create lots of stress. They're expensive to create. They're expensive to proctor. They're expensive to evaluate. They're expensive to get the data back to people in a usable way. And so if we could eliminate that, that would open up resources for things that actually help students and teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to go a little bit further on what you're saying, but I do feel the need for us to talk about the how. And so when I say how, let me be a little more specific, because I could see a lot of people who are listening to this emailing in saying, Eddy, I have to work 2, maybe 3 jobs and pick up a side gig to be able to, keep the lights on at our house because things are so expensive right now.
Yeah.
It's so expensive to have a cell phone, let alone, do all these different things. So I guess within someone's own community, like I'm looking at my community here in Charlotte, North Carolina, what are some things that I can do within my community that I can build upon? Start with one small step and build upon to have some actual impact.
So here's the thing that I tell people, whether Bill Clinton was in office or Obama or Biden or Trump, whoever's in office, I think that local people need to get involved in their schools.
Yes.
And there are lots of ways to get involved in your school. So maybe you're not an academic. Maybe you didn't go to school to become a teacher. That's most people. But guess what? Here's something that I have personally done. So I know this is really powerful. This year, I am not a classroom teacher anymore. I'm not an administrator. I'm a full-time consultant. I spend every Friday that I am not on the road or not in hospice with my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law is at the end of life right now. So I've been in the nursing home with her every day. But when I am home, I go at lunchtime on Fridays for both lunches, and I just pass out treats to kids. I just go and hang out in the lunchroom and say hi to every kid in the lunchroom and give them a cookie or a packet of crackers. And I'm just present. Right now, our children need adults that they know are not paid to be their friends to just show up. And I can't tell you the number of children who I see now in my community who are like, oh, you're the lady who comes at lunch. Oh my gosh, we love you so much. Just being present. And that costs me about $100 a time that I go. So maybe you don't have $100. Maybe you spend $50 and you go once a month. But I think just showing up, now get permission. Don't just show up at a school and be in the lunchroom. Like, we don't need strangers, but I am a known quantity. But go fill out the volunteer paperwork and just show up. Here's another thing that I did at one of the high schools I worked at is we organized, a lot of our students did not have fathers. And this is a predominantly white school, by the way. Predominantly, so I just want to get around these narratives around who is fatherless. It was a predominantly white school. A lot of my children had no fathers. And so I worked in community to find dads who'd be willing to just be at school in the morning at 7 o'clock to greet every kid. So every kid had a dad, had a man who said good morning to them on Fridays. Every Friday, we had a group of men that would show up in the morning and they would just come for half an hour. That's all it took, 30 minutes in the morning. We can all find 30 minutes once a month to show up, and they're on a rotating schedule. So you didn't have to come every Friday, but you would sign up on a list, on a calendar, and we had a group of men. I worked in another school on the east side of our state where we didn't have a lot of, our Black community was not big, but the kids getting in trouble were always Black kids. It was a middle school that I was working with. Yeah. And 97% of discipline referrals were little Black boys. And I had this theory. You don't have one Black adult in your school building. So these kids in middle school, kids are trying to be not like the adults. They're trying to distinguish themselves. I was a middle school teacher. Kids at 12 and 13 are trying to be not like the adults around them. Like that's how they figure out who they are as individuals. And
Yeah.
what they see is a bunch of white women teaching them, and they want to be not that. And so by being not that, a lot of these kids were doing things that would piss off these white female teachers, and they were getting in trouble all the time. And I said, oh, okay, I got a bunch of black men who are business leaders in this community. I'm going to see if they could just come one Friday a month and have lunch with these kids. Just sit in the lunchroom.
Yeah.
And do you know, all it took was 3 months, and 97% of the referrals had been black boys the first semester. That second semester, only 6% were black boys being referred to the office. So I think whether it's an identity thing or there are ways for you to engage in school. And right now, I will tell you, because I am in schools all the time, our children just need adults who can look them in the eye and know their name and know their story. They need people who can listen. The little people need people who can read to them, who can listen to them read. I can tell you that there are probably other things that schools need. They may need somebody to collate papers or to just walk the halls during passing period. Go to your local school and say, hey, I have 5 hours a month. How could I be most useful to you?
Right.
And just get involved. I don't think most Americans realize how hard it is to be an educator right now. And all the additional adult bodies that we can get in school buildings really, really, really matter. And our children need it. And I can't tell you, when I walk in with treats on a Friday, my husband's teaching colleagues are so excited to see me, because I'm somebody who, I don't get paid to be there. I'm choosing to be there on my own, and that matters to them.
Yeah.
So your teachers love to see you as community members show up. I know some parents can't do that. They're working 3 and 4 jobs and they can't. So for you parents who are watching, who don't have time to get away from your job during that school day, spend some time with your children just reading to them at night. So maybe the only time you have with your own personal children is in the evening. Take 30 minutes and just read a book with them. Everybody turn off your technology and just sit and read a book. I did that with my kids until they were 14 years old. So we sat and read the Chronicles of Narnia. We read The Lord of the Rings. And it just became the thing that we did as a family at home. And that changed how my children saw themselves, how they saw reading. Maybe you're not a good reader. Okay, have your children read to you. Have them pick a book and have them read it out loud to you. But take some time at home. If you are not able to get away and get to a school, invest in your own children and make sure they know that learning is important from you.
Yeah. Well, Erin, you touched on something that I'm going to have you back on because the history that so many people don't know, what happened to the black male teacher after Brown v. Board.
Yep.
And I think that having that historical context for so many things that we see in education right now would be critical for increasing empathy and understanding. And, we can change this. It hasn't always been this way.
Yes.
It is so important. So, but I won't put you on for that right now, but we'll definitely have you back. So how, people who have listened to you so far today and just are enthralled with what you're sharing, how can they follow and support your work?
So the easiest thing to do is go to my website, which is erinjonesdreams.com. And I have 3 TED Talks. I would encourage you to watch those. And if you have children, watch them with your kids. I have my first TED Talk that I did back in 2012 or 2013 is called Passion for Change. And it's my why story that I got into education. And it was really my journey from orphanage to the White House to meeting President Obama because of education. And it's really my story of overcoming and of choosing to use all the challenges, but also the blessings that I have to invest in my community. My most recent TED Talk is based on my book. This book is called Bridges to Heal Us, Stories and Strategies for Racial Healing. And this book was birthed out of a really painful time for my family and I. After COVID happened, George Floyd was murdered in the place that I was born. So he was murdered about 20 minutes away from where I was born.
Yeah.
How people in my life responded to George Floyd was so gross and so insensitive that I made a decision. I'm going to use my pain to help other people get better on this topic of race and the history of race and how we can find ways to talk about race in an inviting way and not an aggressive way. And so my book is really an offering of some strategies, but using stories to help people engage in strategy. And my most recent TED Talk is just an excerpt from the book. But follow me there. I am on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm not on X anymore. I think the best place to follow me, though, is TikTok, Afro Educator. I tell people TikTok is where I talk about what I'm thinking. Instagram is where I share what I'm doing.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I will certainly have all of that information for our listeners in the show notes. Erin, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you for what you do.
Thanks. The Unbroken Place podcast is presented by Elevate One Consulting. The show is produced by Say Something Studios. Learn more about both of these in the show notes. The show's music is performed by Kesta, Anthem of Rain, and Holzna Raps. Thank you for being a part of the Unbroken Place community. Look for an ongoing conversation on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also find some helpful resources at eddypaulthomas.com. And make sure to sign up for our newsletter called OK on Second Thought on LinkedIn. Until next time, one love.